4-6 Completing the Square, Part 2. Today's learning goal, students will be able to rewrite and solve quadratic functions by completing the square. In today's lesson, we won't always have perfect square trinomials. So to make a perfect square trinomial, we have to complete the square. So if we are given a quadratic function like x squared plus bx, to complete the square, we are going to take the middle term, we're going to divide it by 2, and we're going to square it. Okay? So that gives me x squared plus bx plus b divided by 2 squared. And now since it's a perfect square trinomial, it is going to factor to x plus b divided by 2 quantity squared. Our first example, I want us to fill in that blank box with what value is going to complete the square. So I have x squared plus 6x, and to complete the square we do b divided by 2 squared. So b is 6 divided by 2, so 6 divided by 2 is 3, 3 squared is 9, so 9 is the value that completes the square. Press pause and I want you to try to complete the square with x squared minus 5x. To complete the square, we take our middle term, which is negative 5, we divide it by 2, and we square it. So I can't simplify negative 5 divided by 2, so negative 5 squared gives me positive 25, 2 squared gives me 4, so 25/4 is what completes our square. Now we are going to use that method to learn how we actually solve for x by completing the square. So the first step is going to be to take c and to move it to the other side. In all of these problems we're used to making it equal to 0. Now we take the c term, that constant term, and we move it to the other side. The second step is going to be to complete the square, and you're going to add b divided by 2 quantity squared to both sides of your equation. So whatever your middle term is, you're going to take it, divide it by 2, and add it to both sides of your equation. Your third step is going to be to factor, and since you added b divided by 2 squared to both sides, you now have a perfect square trinomial that you get to factor. And when you factor the perfect square trinomial, it factors to just x plus or minus whatever your b divided by 2 term was. After you factor, you're going to take the square root of both sides, and then you are going to solve for x. Let's use those 5 steps now to solve by completing the square. So the first step was to move c to the other side. So that leaves me with x squared minus 4x equals negative 2. I like to add boxes to both sides so that I know I have to complete the square and add it to both boxes. It's not necessary, I just do it to remind myself. So I'm going to take my middle term, which is negative 4, divide negative 4 by 2, and I get negative 2, square negative 2, and I am going to add 4 to both sides. Now, x squared minus 4x plus 4 is a perfect square trinomial. So I take the square root of the first term, I get x, take the square root of the last term, and I get 2. Bring down the minus sign in the middle of it, put parentheses around it, and square it. And then negative 2 plus 4 gives me positive 2. Now that I factored, I can go ahead and take the square root of both sides. The square root of something squared is just x minus 2. The square root of 2 is just going to be plus or minus the square root of 2. And then you add 2 to both sides to solve for x. And so your final answer is x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. Example 4, we have 2x squared minus x plus 3 equals x plus 9. So I first need to make this equal 0. So I'm going to subtract x, and I'm going to subtract 9. So that leaves me with 2x squared minus 2x minus 6 equals 0. And if you were to look at the book at this point in time, you're going to see that it divides by 2, so that way it can make this have a coefficient of 1. We are not going to do that. So our first step is still to move c to the other side. So 2x squared minus 2x equals positive 6 now. So now I still need this to have a coefficient of 1, so I'm going to factor out a 2 from both of my terms on the left-hand side. The reason I am teaching it to you this way is so when we get to conics later on this year, you have learned it the same way the entire time. So I just don't want to confuse you over and over again. So I'm going to add my boxes so that way I don't forget to complete the square on both sides. So I take my b term, which is negative 1, divide it by 2, and square it, and I get positive 1/4. But since I have this 2 out in front, I have to do 2 times 1/4 before I add it to my other side. So 2 times 1/4 takes it back down to 1/2 that I add to this side. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to factor. I'm going to bring down my 2. Remember, this factors to x minus b divided by 2, so minus 1/2 quantity squared. And then to add my 6 and my 1/2, I have to multiply 6 by 2 over 2. So that's going to give me 12 over 2. 12 over 2 plus 1 gives me 13 over 2. Now, to get rid of my 2 in front, normally we divide, but since I already have a fraction on the other side, I'm going to just multiply by the reciprocal, which does the same thing. But it just makes it easier over here for my fraction. So I'm left with x minus 1/2 quantity squared. 13 times 1 is 13. 2 times 2 is 4. Now I get to take the square root. Remember, you take the square root of the top, square root of the bottom. So that gives you x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2. Then what we're going to do is add 1/2 to both sides. And it gives you x equals 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2. Now we are going to look at how we rewrite a parabola in standard form back in vertex form without using the negative b divided by 2 like we did before. So we are going to treat it just like we've done the last 2 problems. We're going to complete the square. So our first step is going to move 6 to the other side. But since we have the y, we just move this 6 over here with the y, okay? So I get y plus 6 equals x squared plus 3x. So now I need to complete my squares, so I take 3, I divide it by 2, and I square it, so I'm going to add 9/4 to both sides. Okay? So I have to multiply 6 by 4 over 4, so that way I can add the 9/4 to it. So 6 times 4 is 24. 24 plus 9 is going to give me y plus 33/4 over here. Now I'm going to factor my perfect square trinomial on the right-hand side, so that factors to x plus b divided by 2, so that's 3/2 quantity squared. Remember, if you don't remember that, all what you do is you take the square root of the first term, take the square root of the last term, and it gives you the exact same thing. Then to rewrite it in vertex form, all what you're going to do is you're going to move your 33/4 back to the end. So my vertex form is y equals x plus 3/2 quantity squared minus 33/4. From this equation, you can tell me what the vertex is. So remember, it's the opposite of the number inside your parentheses, so it's negative 3/2. It's the same as the number at the end, so it's negative 33/4. That's your vertex for this problem.